And with us today, we have psychological suspense thriller and erotica author Troy Lambert from America. Hi, Troy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for joining us today. So you have 10 titles out, and they all seem to be fairly intense. What are your influences?
I started actually reading with a lot of science fiction, but then my real influences for what I write now is more Stephen King, Dean Koontz type.
Yes.
And so those are probably my two biggest direct influences as far as in the genre. But there are several newer authors that have also influenced me in that area as well.
Okay. And when did you first get into Stephen King and Dean? Because I know that they were two of my favourite authors as a teenager.
It was when I was a teenager. I started reading when I was very young, as far as novels and things like that. And as I got older, I just progressed through different genres. So I read a lot of science fiction, Asimov, Heinlein, then kind of went into some fantasy, Terry Brooks and Tolkien and stuff like that. And then I kind of discovered that I really liked that action adventure and horror type stuff. And Stephen King was probably my first when he first started writing. Well, when I first started reading his books, when I was probably 16, 17.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, he seems to influence a lot of people.
Yes. Yes.
And what are the sort of books that you're releasing this year? Because I know you've got two new books coming out.
I've kind of eventually, after doing all this writing, I've eventually figured out what my writer voice is, which is really suspense thriller. So my next two books are actually, one is titled Slaughtered, and it's the first in kind of a crime thriller series that's actually going to be written by several different authors.
Okay. So each author gets a different book?
Right. Each author gets a different book, but it basically has to deal with the same character type thing. So I'm writing the inaugural one in that series, and then I'm actually the managing editor for that series for the publisher as well.
Wow.
So,
okay. It's a big job.
That one's coming out in a while, and then the sequel to Stray Ally, which is called The Good Shepherd, is going to come out this year as well. And that series is called the Dog Complex series.
Okay.
So
the Dog Complex. Wow, that's an interesting name. Can you tell us a bit about that series?
Well, the series started out as Stray Ally is a story of a guy who's an ex-soldier. He kind of finds himself in a really bad situation. Finds himself in the middle of the wilderness and kind of befriends this dog. And the dog ends up helping him more than he really helps the dog.
Okay.
And the dog has kind of some mysterious abilities and things like that we really don't understand.
Oh.
And so the second book in the series kind of goes back and explains why the dogs have these powers and then more about their story.
Oh, that's interesting, actually. Sounds like an original idea, which is always good.
Yeah, it was a little different. The way I started Stray Ally was the first scene for the book came to me in a dream in the middle of the night. I woke up the next morning and wrote it and started writing the book from there.
Wow. So you mentioned movie, because I write as well, which is neither here nor there, but when I'm writing, I see it as a movie in my head. Is that how you get it when you're writing?
Sort of. It's kind of like a movie in my head. It's kind of like the characters telling me their stories. My stuff tends to be very character driven, and it's more about the characters kind of sitting there going, okay, this is my story, tell it, type thing. But I do use a lot of screenwriting techniques when I write.
Right.
I use beat sheets as my method for doing story construction, which is very much a screenwriter, movie, TV type tool. But it works very well for books as well.
Okay, so have you had experience in screenwriting, or it was just something that you've looked at?
Well, I had experience acting. I did a lot of theater when I was younger, and I did very few small movie type roles, but I did a lot of theater, a lot of community theater. And so I was used to the story structure that was essentially a 3-act story.
Yeah.
And even though theater is a lot of time done in 2 acts, when you really look at the scripts, it's really a 3-act type thing. And so I was very used to that type of storytelling, even though I started writing very young. But when I first started writing, I had no idea how to construct a story. All of my early stuff is absolutely horrible, and you will never see it. But
You have to start somewhere. We all start somewhere.
that's right. Yeah.
And I read in your bio that you have done a short stint in the army. Does that influence some of the things that you write about, do you think?
I think it does a little bit. My time in the army I mean, it was relatively short. It was one enlistment period, and it was not an extremely pleasant time for me. So maybe some of the darkness in
Yes.
my writing comes out of that.
Yes, I
Uh,
don't know that anyone can say their time in the army was pleasant.
yeah, it was a pretty tough time as far as personally as well. You know, my first wife and I went through a divorce during the army. You
Mm-hmm.
know, things like that. So
Right.
um, it,
A lot of
probably some
upheaval.
dark side and stuff comes out, and then some of the things that I know about military training and weapons and stuff like that comes out of that. That
Okay, that's interesting. And before you did all that, so you started writing when you say young, I assume, what, when you were 8 or 9 or 10?
But yeah, I wrote my first real story when I was like 6,
Okay.
called George and the Giant Castle, and then all the way through elementary school and even high school and stuff like that, I knew I wanted to be a writer.
Yep.
I didn't know how to make a living as a writer. I didn't know how to make those two things work. And so the constant bombardment from high school counselors and stuff like that was, oh, that's really neat that you want to be a writer, but what are you going to do for a living? How are you going to make money? And so I went on several career type adventures
Yes.
um, before I settled on actually becoming a writer and I actually figured out how to make that work.
But
So,
isn't that also, I hated how they do that. They sort of, everyone assumes, and I had that impression when I was growing up too. I always loved to write. And the impression that the older generation gives you is that, oh, it's impossible, it's too hard, so don't even consider it. So I didn't even look into becoming a writer until I was a lot older because I just assumed that it was impossible unless you're an absolute genius. So,
right. It was
yeah.
presented as actually making it as a writer was just so much, there was so much luck involved, is
Mm,
what was presented. And it was always presented that you don't pay your groceries with a lottery ticket. You
mm,
know, you don't pay your rent with a lottery ticket. You get something that's a sure thing, and then you write on the side.
yeah.
And so that was everybody's advice. And what I tell younger authors now is, first of all, when they tell me I want to be a writer for a living, I'm like, well, first advice is do something else because this is really hard.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
and so it's really difficult to do for a living. It involves a lot of commitment, and it's a lot different than what people think it is.
Mm,
That you just sit and write all day and pass out novels to people, and they buy them by the thousands because they love you.
yeah.
Um, and they're waiting for your words with bated breath. So it doesn't exactly work that way. But then also what I tell them is I say, you know, really follow your dream. If you really can't see yourself doing anything else, follow your dream, but just reevaluate what you mean by making a living. It doesn't mean a Mercedes and a big house in the suburbs
Mm,
and all that kind of stuff. It means that you're going to live a little lower level than everybody else, maybe as
yeah.
far as material possessions, but you're going to be way happier.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, it's probably not a bad thing to try and get into when you're young because you don't have maybe a mortgage or kids to support or anything. So, probably then, if you have the support network at home, it's probably a good idea to get as much knowledge about it as you can then. And then later, if you've already got your writing knowledge, maybe then go and get a job doing something else and write at night time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So do
Yeah.
you make a living out of writing now, or do you do other jobs as
I
well?
make a living basically out of writing,
Hmm.
editing, and then I actually do paid research.
Okay.
Um, it's kind of an interesting field. So I actually do paid research for the United States federal government for
Okay.
different things. And so that's a big part of my way to make a living as well. So between those three things, I make a living working at home.
Mm.
And most of what I do is probably 90% of what I do is related to writing or publishing in some way or another. Because the research is really just writing, it's nonfiction writing, it's creating a story.
Yeah.
But it's just a more specific story. You don't get to just make everything up.
Yeah. It's not a bad job either in the fact that you'll be learning a lot as you're doing it. And, it's always fodder for the next story, potentially.
Oh yeah, so I've repurposed a lot of my research, and I do a lot of research into mining and things like that.
Okay.
And so people ask me when my mining story is coming out, and it's actually it's in the works. So
Actually, that could be quite scary. There's a lot of potential because once you're down there,
well, yes, I've started part of Typewriter Repair Shop. My most recent novella is in the Ridge Falls series, which a friend of mine, a writer friend of mine, and I are writing together different stories in this universe. And the start of that, of the Ridge Falls universe, which Ridge Falls is a fictionalized town in Idaho, but it's based on a real town.
Okay.
That actually, they put in a dam to dam the river to create a hydroelectric power. And so they moved the town. The town was down where the reservoir was going to be. So they moved the town, but they left all the buildings there.
Yes.
So when the water filled up, the buildings are still there under the water. You can scuba dive down there and see them and all that kind of stuff.
I think they did that here too with our Warragamba Dam in Sydney. So yeah.
So it's just begging for horror to be written about those, things under the water, the evil things that are under the water. And so the story that we've come up with is the original evil came from a mine, because it was a mining town. And the miners enclosed it in the mine, and then, of course, when they built the reservoir, that released all the stuff that was in the mine, all the evil stuff, and now it lives in the reservoir instead. So,
that's pretty cool.
So my miner story that's coming up will actually be kind of the origin story of Ridge Falls.
Wow, that sounds exciting.
It's going to be titled Minor Inconveniences, but spelled minor.
Love it. I love the playing on words.
So
That's always a good thing. And have you ever tried to write any other genres other than dark stuff?
yes, I've got a couple stories in anthologies with a press out of Florida called Untold Press, and one of them I wrote a fantasy story about a group of dragons called the Clan, and so it turned out to be a suspense thriller fantasy story because that's kind of my home voice. So I automatically made it into, yes, it's a suspense thriller with dragons.
Oh, cool.
The only one that I've written that's really significantly different is it's almost like an inspirational piece. It's a little different writing for me, but it's titled The Angel. It was in another one of their anthologies. And the premise of the anthology was you had to write a story where your main character was something undead, a zombie, an angel, a demon, something like that. Right. But your story had to be based on a fairy tale. So it's called Happily Ever Afterlife is the name of the anthology.
Very nice.
So my story is called The Angel, and it's based on Hans Christian Andersen's lesser-known fable, The Angel, which is also based on a poem that he wrote. Okay. So the poem is laced throughout the story, and that was a benefit for Boston Children's Hospital. So all of the proceeds from my story in that anthology went to Boston Children's Hospital.
Nice. And is that anthology still for sale?
Yes, it is.
Yes, okay. Is it an ebook as well?
Yes, it's an ebook on Amazon, and it's for sale in physical copies as well.
Great, okay. That sounds like a good one. I have to check that one out. Yeah. That's the problem with this job. I'm always seeing awesome books, and yes, my Kindle, or I shouldn't say my Kindle app on my iPad is full, almost. I just keep buying books.
I have a to-be-read list that's incredible, and then I go to writers' conferences and stuff, and then I buy signed books. Yes. So that's always a very dangerous place for me to go.
Oh, I think it's dangerous for anybody, yes.
I bought more books at the book sale than the price I paid to go to the conference. So...
Oh, how funny. Hang on, sorry. Okay, so you are published with 3 small presses, and you also have some self-published books. Did you get published with the small presses before self-publishing was popular?
No, I kind of went about things a strange way, but it was, at the time, it was what everyone was telling you. If you wanted to self-publish, this was the way you did things. Is first you released a collection of short stories. So me and several writer friends of mine, all have short story collections that came out around the same time, because this is what you were supposed to do.
Oh, okay.
That was the wisdom. You were supposed to release that, and it would lead to your other work. And then I self-published my first and second novels, actually, that are in a trilogy that I wrote. And then I was published with a small press. And really the reason I was published with a small press is I was working for them as an editor, and they said, when are you going to write something and submit something for us? And I had this story of Stray Ally, and I was like, I really don't want to go to some of the work that's involved with self-publishing, first of all. And I'd like to also give them something, publish something with them.
Yeah.
And so I submitted Stray Ally, and they were like, whoa, okay, this is wonderful, we want this book. And I really loved that book, but I really needed to finish the first trilogy that I wrote, and I wanted to just finish it as being self-published. And so I finished that up, and I was very glad to have it over with. It's kind of the thing I needed to write. It's a little autobiographical in parts and things like that. And I was so glad it was done when I was done with it.
Yeah.
But so since then, I have published things with small presses,
Mm.
and I've self-published depending upon the project.
Yep.
So like my latest novella, Typewriter Repair Shop, it doesn't really fit into a publisher type thing.
Hmm.
And because it's in that Ridge Falls universe, I wanted the control that comes from self-publishing.
Yes.
So that one was self-published.
Okay.
But the sequel to Stray Ally, of course, will be published with the small press that has Stray Ally. So,
Okay. Yeah, and that control, have you found that publishing, even with a small press, they want you to take things out or change a title? Have you had that happen to you or not yet?
um, well, I work as an editor, and even though I work as an editor, I still get bent when people want to edit my stuff. And I let them, but I've learned I let them do it anyway. Because really, what we're all trying to do is put out the best story we possibly can.
Mm.
So I haven't had them want to change major things because I'm involved in critique groups and I have critique partners and things like that. So usually I've weeded out the major problems by the time I submit it to them.
Right.
So hopefully it doesn't look absolutely horrible by the time I submit it. So I've usually worked those things out. So I haven't had them change major stuff, and I haven't had them change any titles.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. Yep. Yep.
So
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you know what you're doing and you're doing it very professionally, which is always good to hear because, as we all know, there's a lot of self-published authors out there who don't do it professionally. They don't get it edited. They make up their own covers and it's just a disaster.
yes, it's awful all the way. There's so many things that are bad about it because first of all, it becomes very narcissistic, and that becomes very to me, it becomes very obvious to the people that are looking for books.
Mm.
Then, so we've had people that, I work as an editor for a publisher and will reject their story, but we'll give them advice on this. These are things you should do to fix it.
Oh, that's nice of you because a lot of them don't take the time to do that.
Well, yeah, and I hate that. Because me personally, I hate getting the rejection that's like that. It just doesn't fit our needs at this time, and I'm like, why? What can I do to make something that does fit your needs so that we can actually do something? So anyway, so I'd like to give people at least some feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you will see that then suddenly, a week later, you see that self-published on Amazon. And you go,
Yes.
the thing is not ready. And I know it's not good, and the cover's not good. And then those people wonder why they don't sell any books.
Mm.
And they've just put out a bad reputation out there, and I just felt like when I started, I needed to do it right from the beginning because I came from enough of a business background to understand you can be as artsy about your book as you want.
Mm.
Once it gets done, while you're writing it, but once it gets done, it's a product that you're trying to bring to market.
Exactly. And I'm of the opinion too that how dare somebody put out something that's unedited and full of mistakes and horrific and expect people to pay money for it. I mean, if you go to a shop and you order a cheese and tomato sandwich and they give you 2 pieces of bread with nothing in the middle, you're not going to pay for that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. It's partially a pride in your work that your work needs to be something that's worthwhile.
Exactly.
So you need to put the effort, the time, effort, and investment into that.
Exactly.
And that's the thing is I tell people, publishing is a pay now or pay later thing. Self-publishing is you pay now. You
Yes.
pay for cover, you pay for editing, you pay for all that stuff, and you get the big royalties in the end. If you with the publisher, they pay for the editing, they pay for the cover, they pay for the formatting, but they take some of your royalties. So either you're paying, it's just a matter of when you're going to pay and how much control you're willing to give up of that particular project.
Yeah. I also think some authors aren't as suited to self-publishing as others. Maybe some haven't got quite the business head, or maybe they can't get their way around social media to do promotions and things like that. So I think traditional publishing, other than being able to get your book into bookshops, I think it's good for some authors who maybe aren't as business-minded or aren't as confident in those areas, but at least they know what their weaknesses are and they're willing to work with that.
Right, because there are people out there that will say every author should self-publish, And that's me.
No, I don't agree with that either.
There are tons of people. First of all, there are tons of paths to publication. I think the big five in the U.S. have a lot of problems. So that's not the way I would ever go. But I know tons of authors who are doing, hybrid publishing, which is essentially what I'm doing. Some projects go to small presses. Some projects go to self-publishing. That's just the way that we do it.
Yeah.
And it depends on what you want to do with that project, and how much responsibility you want to have for it, and how much control you want to have over it, and how much of that you're willing to give up in exchange for all the things a publisher does for you that are frankly really time consuming. It's extremely time consuming to source covers, to source editors, all those different things. So it's very difficult to do. And people don't understand that it's a business part of it, and sometimes you don't find the best person the first time.
Yeah.
So,
well, also they're investing their money, and that's the flip side of that is if you're self-publishing, I think you need to say to yourself, well, I am going to have to spend a certain amount of money on editing and covers, but do you believe in your book enough? And if you don't believe in it enough to spend the money, providing you can get the money, because I know some authors can't, but why should someone else believe in your book enough to put in the time and effort and the money if you don't think it's good enough?
Yeah, I mean, why would they spend money on it if you don't want to invest in it? Why would they invest in it? Because you hear the argument all the time. You see little memes on Facebook and stuff about, oh, it's just the same price as a cup of coffee. I'm like, yeah, but the cup of coffee does not ask me for an 8-hour commitment to read it. The cup of coffee is gone fairly quickly. You're asking me for my time commitment to read your book. Not only to spend $2.99, but you actually want me to read it. I'm assuming that's why people write books, is they want someone to read it.
Yes.
So there's a time commitment involved there that's more than just saying it's $5 out of your wallet. No, it's more than $5 out of my wallet. It's $5 plus my time. Plus, if you make me mad, you ruin my day by having this horrible book out there that now I paid for it, I started to read, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make me happy. And the whole reason I read is for recreation, to make me happy.
Yes.
So, as an escape of some sort.
Well, I find now that I read the samples for everything, and that's actually what we do at Booktastic before we feature a book, is we read a sample to make sure it's been edited. Of course, we can't guarantee everyone's going to enjoy the story, but we can say, hey, this has been edited and it's not going to be a disaster. Like, you're not wasting your money. So
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's important.
Yeah, I mean, the review system is broken, so people are putting reviews, having their family or whatever, put 5-star reviews on a book that's a piece of junk. I just recently, a local author that I knew here, I saw that, and I knew she has issues with her self-published book, and I saw that she had a couple of 5-star reviews, so I went and looked at them, and one of the 5-star reviews was her reviewing her own work. And so I immediately told her, no, this is a big no-no. If you get caught doing that, Amazon's going to slap you harder than you want to be slapped, and you're already not selling books. So it's very difficult to just go by reviews. Yes. So I usually do reviews, samples, and then, I mean, it's kind of a proven thing that author reputation is where people buy books off author reputation. So you need to preserve your reputation as an author by making sure everything you put out there is excellent.
Well, it's about building an audience over time, rather than trying to get, 50,000 people in 1 year to read your book. That's going to be pretty hard. But if you look at it as, something that you're going to do over a few years and gather readers as you go, then reputation is very important.
And it's much more realistic, because I tell people, you can do enough marketing to try to get 50,000 people to read your first book in the first year. But you won't write the next book, because you won't have time. You'll spend all your time marketing.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there for writers, because it's a business and there's a balance in what you're doing.
And can you see a time when writing is all you do? Like, you'll get to that point? Or you enjoy doing the other stuff?
In some ways, I wouldn't mind if the research stuff went down a little bit and I did less of that, but I don't think I can see myself not editing. And the reason is I really love to create stories. My dog just went under the desk.
That's all right.
Sorry. But anyway, I really love to help people create and polish their own stories. Because what I've really found about myself is what I really am is not necessarily a writer or an editor or a researcher, but I'm a storyteller. That's what I like to do, is tell stories. So I've done videography and told stories.
Okay.
through video.
Right.
I've told stories through my own writing. I've told stories through research because really at the end of it, that's what you're really doing is telling a story. It's just a nonfiction story of what really happened somewhere. Because mine's usually historical research. So it's what really happened somewhere, but it's a story.
Yeah.
And editing, all you're doing is helping someone else tell their story.
Yes.
So it all relates back to storytelling. So I don't know that I could see myself giving up editing entirely, even if I could. I might come to that point somewhere online. I just don't see myself there yet.
No, but that's good if you enjoy doing it. I think keep doing it.
Yeah. When it stops being fun, that's probably when I'll stop doing it.
And can you tell us about, you've got a couple of books coming out this year. What are they and what are they called and what are they about?
So the one the one I told you is Good Shepherd, which is a sequel to Stray Ally. And then Slaughtered should be out sometime this year. That one's still a little bit up in the air because we're trying to start something, do something new. So I want to make sure that foundation is very, very good. And then there's the distinct possibility that I'll have a couple other ones come out as well, novellas.
Okay.
I'll have at least one other novella, and I might get Minor Inconveniences out by the end of the year if I'm really ambitious.
Okay.
So,
You got a big schedule on there.
there might be 4 this year. I don't know.
Wow. Oh, it's good if you can get the time to do it because it is time consuming by the time you write them and then you edit them and then do all the other stuff you have to do.
Yeah, and I write really fast. My first drafts are very fast.
Yep.
And then it's the process after that that's time consuming. But for me, my first drafts are usually very, very fast.
How many words can you write in a day?
Well, on average, I write between 3,000 and 5,000 words a day.
That's pretty good.
But if I really push myself, I can write a lot more.
Yeah.
So I've done a few 10,000 word days.
Oh my God.
But those are typically very draining. So usually the problem with those is usually the next day really isn't that productive. So, but what it does do is it gets that stream of consciousness writing out. So usually that 10,000 words, most of it is pretty good.
That's good.
So your editing process is a little less harrowing. I mean, the grammar and stuff might not be as great when you're writing that fast.
Yep.
But your story flows, and you don't have story continuity problems because it's not like you wrote that scene 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
You wrote it 2 hours ago.
Yes, and that can get tricky. So with that trilogy that you wrote, what's the trilogy called before I go further?
It's called the Samuel Elijah Johnson series.
Right.
And the 3 books are Redemption, Temptation, and Confession.
Okay, so when you were writing those, and you obviously you've written the last one, how did you find writing the last one as opposed to just doing a first or second book in the series?
The last one was... I had a lot of mixed emotions because it was very personal. Some of the stuff in it was it was really writing from the heart. But also I was ready kind of for that chapter in my life to be done and that trilogy to be done. So I was very excited for it to be over. And I wanted to, when I closed the trilogy, to make it very clear that this story arc and this trilogy is closed. There will never be a 4th book in this series.
Did you kill everybody?
Samuel Elijah Johnson shows up later is actually going to show up in another book.
Oh, okay.
So his character survives, and some of the characters survive, a lot of them, but I wanted to make sure that, because it was really kind of Samuel Elijah Johnson's story was really what the trilogy is about. So he's a guy who, in the first book, he gets his law degree while he's in prison.
Right.
Because his whole intent is he was innocent of what he was sent there for. He wasn't really innocent of everything, but he was innocent of what he was sent there for. So he wanted to get himself free, and he just saw this was the way to do it for him to get his law degree while he was in prison. Well, once he gets it, then he goes, well, now I'm free. What do I do with it? I have a law degree, but I've been in prison since I was 17. I'm in my 30s. What do I do now? Because he has no contacts, no life. And so one of his people that's in prison with him convinces him, hey, I should be your first client. You should do this for other people. So he starts on his adventure, but he has this because of his background and his mother's background, he has a very strong sense that he's special and unique and probably above most other people because he's done all these things. And so Temptation is kind of about him meeting his that dark side of things and going, maybe the world isn't so pretty after all, and maybe I'm not always right.
Ah,
That
okay.
confession comes back to him kind of confronting his past and those weird things his mom told him and stuff. We find out where those came from and how he has to come to terms with those. And
Okay.
so, in the middle of kind of an action adventure type thing, so he's always encountering these demons under some kind of extreme stress.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because it's the character's journey just as much as the external plot. And I think there's always the question, what drives the book? Is it the plot or is it the character? And I think the characters create the plot because without the characters, you don't have a story. So,
Yeah, for me, the characters create the plot. And I think one of the things I have a hard time with is I when I first started out, I was very much a pantser. I just wrote things. I didn't outline anything. Well, then as I matured as a writer, I began to see, okay, I can actually write faster because I'm always thinking of ways to write faster.
yeah.
And so
Soon you'll be doing 20,000 words a day.
so I use a program called Scrivener because I
Yep.
saw that for me, my productivity increased 30% as soon as I started using that program.
Wow.
So I've never gone back to another program because it works for me. And so I started using beat sheets and kind of a loose outline. But when you have character-driven stories, I always think I know where an ending is going to be, and it doesn't always it ends up somewhere close, but it's almost never exactly where I thought it was going to be.
Well, your characters like to take you on pull your hand and say, no, we're going this way.
Exactly. The end of Redemption, I had my first novel in the trilogy. I had the ending planned. I knew how it was going to end. I got down to writing that part, and I'm like, no, he wouldn't do that. And so I changed it, and it ended up being much better that I changed it to actually what the character would have done. It made the book better. It made everything better. But, it was kind of disheartening as a writer because it's my first real novel, and I'm like, I can't even end the thing the way it's supposed to be. But then people loved it, so I had to. It took me a while to kind of get over some of that stuff. But it's pretty much the same process every time you write a book, no matter how many you've written. The things go exactly the same. You start out at the beginning, you think, I'm the greatest writer in the world. This is the most fantastic idea anyone has ever had, ever. And then about halfway through, you get the blues and you go, I am a hack.
Yeah.
Eventually, someone's going to find out that I'm not a writer. I'm going to delete everything on my hard drive and go get a job. And then at the end of it, you complete the book and you're like, yay, I'm done. The end. And then you go through all the stages of grief in 24 hours. And because all of that was so much fun, you do it again.
You do it again. I know, it's an obsession. I don't know how many authors I've spoken to, myself included, and yes, I do talk to myself sometimes. It's you're just so keen to write the book, and then when you've reached your goal and you're doing all the marketing, then you go, am I crazy? Like, I don't want to do this again. And so many times you feel like giving up, but you always have to come back to it because it's there and you can't escape it.
Yeah, it's my mental stability, it's my sanity, and it's my therapy, and it really is my obsession. And I've found tons of authors are just we're obsessed.
We are.
And I'm a workaholic anyway. I always have been, and so just because I'm writing doesn't mean that's changed. It just means the work that I've done has changed.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I'm satisfied with what I'm doing because I was working, sometimes 40 to 60 hours of work. A work week on something somebody else cared about.
Yeah.
And now I work 60 hours a week on stuff I care about.
Wow.
And that makes it worth it.
Well, you are winning, I have to say. You are definitely winning in life if you could do that. So, well, we're going to wrap this up in a minute, but where can people find you around and about on the internet?
You can find me at my website at troylambertwrites.com. And my website's just been updated. Okay. And then you can, of course, find me on Facebook and Twitter. On Twitter, I'm Author Troy. On Facebook, I'm Troy Lambert. If you can't find me there, you're probably not looking too hard.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Pinterest and Instagram and a bunch of other places too. So
okay.
You can connect with me all kinds of different places.
Okay, I have a quick question though, even then I sort of wrap it up. How much time do you think you have to spend a week on social media and promotion?
I think you really have to be careful about that because it can also be a time waster. But I think you really need to the key is you really need to be engaged in conversations, not just posting buy my book links and stuff like that.
Yep.
So typically, I would say you're usually going to spend a couple hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not counting your personal stuff of talking to your mom or your brother or whoever, but that's your actual marketing time. So,
Yep.
if you spend between 10 and 15 hours a week on social media of some sort, or a couple different sorts, and some things you can do on the run and on your phone and all that kind of stuff nowadays, but if you're actually interacting with people, I think that's really your best ball game. Social media is really about being social, and people want to know who you are and interact with you. They don't just want to see your posts.
No. And that's actually good. So, readers, if you want to connect with Troy, just go and visit him at any one of those sites, and I'm sure he will say hello to you and chat to you. And if you buy his book and enjoy it, make sure you let him know, because authors need that feedback.
Yes, we love it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yes. And I will be posting all the links to where you can find Troy on the little written part of this interview. So if you want to click on those links, it'll make it a lot easier. But I really want to thank you for spending the time to talk to us today. It's been really interesting.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, that's okay. And it's good to see a writer who's an editor as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, well, have a great day.
All right, thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.